Okay, so in this case, let me see how best I could go through this at a high level. You were coming into the bank website, and you start the application. There'll be some forms for you to accept and terms to accept and all that stuff. Then you add in your personal details, and then we do an eligibility check. Are you eligible for membership first? And this is something that we built from a prior project that was inheriting those requirements into this new project. When that eligibility check was done, we would send an OTP verification. So this is going to be sent via these two APIs. We had one called Ping Identity and one called Twilio. And these were just, making sure that you are the person and you have the phone number, etc. Now, if you're eligible, then you would go to product selection. So now you can choose what product you want. In our case, we have only one product, which was the unsecured line of credit, but it could, in the future, would be able to add more products. If you're not eligible, then you can't proceed. Like, you get thrown out of the flow. We say, thank you for your application, but we can't continue. And that was how we ended there. Once you're eligible for membership and you've chosen your product, then you get some business profile information. You need to add, for example, what type of business is it? Is it a LLC? Is it a corp? Is it a sole proprietor? If you are a sole proprietor, then we have some additional things that we had to do. We would raise a task in a different system. So now we had to send an API call to a different system and raise a task that says this application needs manual review. Somebody needs to log into the system and see it. And the team would confirm, DOR stands for Department of Revenue in America, that you are a sole prop registered to the department, right? So there's a check for that. If they can't confirm that, then you can't proceed because we don't know who you are. We don't know if you have a business, so we won't go forward with that. If you're not a sole proprietor, how this was working is we'll do these KYB checks, which was calling some additional APIs. These are the APIs, Alloy and Desk, right? Once that's passed through, then you have to enter some revenue information, like how much money do you make per year? What is your expenses? All of these things. Then you add your guarantors. Who's the guarantor for the loan? Do you have any additional owners? Do you have agents and signers? All of these people. And once you put those names and email addresses in, we would automatically send an email to those people for them to complete the flow. Because we will not give you a loan unless everybody who is on your article is agreeing to this loan, right? So we do that and we send that out by Twilio. We do a KYC check to make sure in banking, we have to make sure that we know your customer. That's what that is. If you already existed, so this system was for new members and giving them a new loan. So if you already were a member or you already had an organization in there, then you're not new. So we kick you out. So if you're already existing, we check that you exist in the core banking system, well, you can't continue with this application. If that doesn't happen, then we go and pull your credit for everybody, including the owners and everybody else. And then we'd wait for everybody to finish applying before we would go and decision your loan. So in other words, if the primary finished the flow and we sent the email to the other owners and they took forever, they took like a couple of days, we won't decision on the loan until everybody has completed it and everybody has been approved for membership, etc. So once we do that, then we go to this other API, and this API would go and do all of its magic to figure out if they want to give you the loan or not and how much the loan amount should be. And they'll come back with a response to us. Is it approved or is it denied? It could be manually reviewed. For example, they would say, well, we don't have enough information to make an automated decision. So we'd send it to raise a case for it. Somebody would go into the system and decide on the loan as the underwriter. Or we would say it's denied. We don't want to give you the loan, but you still qualify for membership. So do you want to be a member, but we won't give you a loan right now? And so we'll offer you membership and you can decide to accept it or not. Or if it's approved, then we'll do some other checks here. Don't want to get into that. But once it's approved, then we show you your offer. So, hey, thank you. You've been approved for this loan. This is the amount that we are offering you. These are the loan terms, the interest rate, all of these different things. We'll show that to you. And then we update our decisioning system. We let you choose which card you want, if you want a debit card, and if you want to pay from your savings checking account, etc. And we can set up auto pay so that the loan can be paid out of this checking account. And then we book the loan. Right? So that was the process at a high level that we would have gone through for this system. So obviously there's a lot going on here, right? In a lot of things, a lot of calls, a lot of places people can come out, lots of unhappy paths that can happen, right? That you'd have to take into consideration as the BA to make sure you cover all of those and you have the right error messages. In this project, we had a very thorough Figma design that laid out all the UI from start to end and all the different paths. So that was very helpful because as we go through the requirements, if we found anything that was not covered, we would tell the UX designer, they would do all of their magic to come up with the right verbiage and the right descriptions and so on. And then we would just be able to put that in our user story. For this company, the Figma design was the Bible. This is where all the truth lies. If it's not in Figma, it didn't happen. So even if you wrote it in the acceptance criteria of your user story, you had to make sure the UX designer updated the design to reflect it. Because if you don't do that, when you go to test it, the design is not going to match your user story, and then the test is going to fail. So that was an important thing for us as well. All right. Any questions before I move on to the next part of this?
No, and there's none in the chat. No new questions in the chat at this point.
All right, good. So with all of that we had to build, all those APIs that we had to call, all those different backend and front end that we had to do, this was what we presented to our stakeholders about the timelines for this. So they wanted to we started our initiation early June. We had a very short time for doing analysis. This is where we'd come up with all the requirements and make sure we vet them. And then we get into construction, which is where we actually start building. And then we had some time for our UAT and our SIT. So at the time when we presented this, we had two different options for them to choose from. Like this is like one track, and this is more like the realistic track, right? Which gave us some more buffer in case anything came up, because you can plan very well, but when you get into writing the code, things go awry. So in our case, we actually were very successful and we were able to get to the best case scenario. And I'll give you some examples of why that happened. So this was our timeline. And right here, we only have SIT and UAT testing, but we had a lot more other testing that we had to do. This is a financial institution, so there's a lot of testing. We not only did SIT testing and UAT testing, but we also did accessibility testing, which is in America, we have something called ADA, American Disabilities Act, where anything that you put out there, like a website, like a movie or anything that you need to have the public consume, you need to make sure it's accessible for people who may be visually impaired. So in our case, you need to be able to turn on the screen reader and have it audibly tell you what's on the screen. So those are some of the things which I have later in a slide for lessons learned, that as we were building at such a fast pace, we actually didn't keep a check of making sure that it was also accessible. And so there was a lot of work we had to do before go live to make it accessible enough so it would pass some of these tests that we had to do. So accessibility testing, UAT testing, SIT, which is the system integration testing. So because we had all of these different APIs, all of these different systems we're calling, we had to check to make sure that the data that we're sending to the different places actually made it and is doing what it's supposed to do. It's working as expected. Because with all of these API calls that we're doing, it's possible that something breaks and then everything downstream breaks. So we had to do a very, very thorough and extensive system integration testing to make sure that wasn't the case. At the end of every sprint, we also did testing, right? So we're doing regular unit testing, and we do that test before we demo to the stakeholders. We also did penetration testing. So we made sure that when we're closer to go live, we made sure that it could handle the load and that there wasn't any odd behavior or slower, loading time was appropriate and things like that. And then we also did some security testing to make sure that we didn't create any new wormholes, right? We didn't create any security vulnerabilities, so there wasn't any opportunity for them to do spoofing or phishing or any of those threat things. As a part of the project, as a BA, I also had to be a part of something we call threat modeling, which was as we're building these requirements out, as we're writing these requirements, to do an evaluation to make sure that we're not opening up new risks because of the way that we have designed it, right? So this was an ongoing thing that we had to do as we were doing the project. And that was the first time I had to do it during the project. In past lives, I would do it at the end, but in this project, it was very important to them that we kept the security posture very, very good. So what were some of the other business analyst challenges that I faced and that we were able to overcome as a team? So this project obviously was huge. There's a lot of different teams involved. We had a middleware layer, and we had a BA for that, and there was a team working on that. We had the presentation layer, which I was the BA for, and then we have our core banking system, which had a BA. So all the BAs had to kind of work together to make sure that we all, even though we had our specific focus areas, that we didn't do anything that would counteract what the other person was doing, right? So we had a BA sync once a week to make sure that we were all on the same page. We had, as I said, the Figma was the source of truth. So whatever requirements we came up with, it must reflect in the Figma, so that we were very much in close communication with the UX designers. We had 3 UX designers on this project, and they had their hands full. So it sounds like a lot, but they were very stressed throughout this project. We had 4 POs. So the POs were the source of truth for the business requirements. So they understood how the business wants these loan applications to go. And so we had 4 of them that we would meet with regularly to confirm whatever we were putting in the requirements. So it was very important for us to keep in touch with them as well. We had 2 delivery managers. We had 4 account managers at the C-level executive suite to make sure the account was being managed properly. The 3 BAs I just talked about, and we had third-party consultants that were also in there to make sure that they handle some of the things.
Just 2 quick things for you before you go to your next slide. One, accessibility is a big issue in Canada as well. In fact, we have legislation that's been created by the federal government, and they've got until 2040 to be fully compliant. So I put a link in the chat for anyone who is interested in the concept or the legalities of accessibility in Canada. And then Purva asked a question, maybe if you could use a specific feature, how do you go about creating your user stories, and how did that work with the devs and plan for sort of the next user stories in sequence? How did you sort of keep that straight?
So I do have an example of a user story further on in this slide, which we'll get to. But yeah, there was a lot of collaboration with the user stories, and we had change management control that was very strict also, to make sure that after we've built something, that they say, oh, no, we didn't want it that way. That's not what we thought. Well, we've already built it. So now we have to create a change request to go and change it, because we also had a very strict timeline. One of the things I didn't mention, let me go back to this, was that all of this needed to be done within 4 sprints. 4 sprints. And it was a set time. There is no wiggle room for anything. So 4 sprints for development. I think it was like 2 sprints for sit and UAT, and then go live. And that was not changeable. So you don't have time to do all of these changes, right? It's 4 sprints and it's done. But yeah, I'll get to some user stories in a minute for that person who asked the question. All right, so the requirements. So because we had such a short timeline to do everything, they insisted that the entire backlog be written ahead of the first sprint. So, right. So it's rough, because normally you're used to agile where you just do just in time, and you're refining requirements ahead of the next sprint. We didn't have the luxury here. We had 4 sprints to get it done, and they wanted everything done and approved and ready to go before the start sprint 0. So in order to do that, a couple of things helped us. One, we were inheriting requirements from the previous project that only handled membership. So now this project was only about the loan approval, so we could kind of incorporate the membership into the loan approval, and that helped us because some of it was already done. But it didn't make it easier, because the loan approval piece had a lot more complexity than the membership approval piece. The second thing is, by the time I got involved, they already had discussed a lot of this already with their legal department, with their POs. So they had a very good concrete understanding of what the requirements that they wanted were. And they already had built out the Figma designs. So when I came in, they're like, we need all of the user stories written ahead of the sprint, but don't worry, we already have the requirements. It's fine. We know what we're doing. We just want you to basically translate it into we're using Azure DevOps at the time. We want to translate it into PBIs or user stories for Azure DevOps. So that was a very big strain. and I worked very long hours and weekends to try to make it. But we did make it. So before we started the first sprint, all the backlog was done and approved and discussed. And in order to do that, we also had to plan the sprints ahead of time. So we knew it was 4 sprints and we had what we're going to put into each sprint. So we had to not only write the story, have the acceptance criteria, but also plan how the sprints are going to go, which again is against agile because you don't really plan it ahead of time. You should be adaptable to change. So this was a very unconventional way to do projects, but that's what we had to do. There was over 9,400 product backlog items created by the time we ended this project. Not all of those were user stories. I would say maybe like 3,000 of them were user stories. And then we had bugs, and then we had some test lines and stuff like that. So it turned out to be quite a sizable chunk of work. We had to incorporate the PO approval process because what happened in the previous project, we kind of had a chaos. And I had a very good handover from the person who was working on this project before me. And I think as BAs, when we're working on projects and we need to hand it off to somebody else, I think it's very, very important for us to really give a good handover for the person who's going to pick up where we left off. Because oftentimes we get into the project and we're like, why do we have these here? And where did this story come from? And what's that go? And it's a lot of work to try to figure out what somebody else was doing. And they're like, see ya, sayonara, I'm going off to my next project. And you're left holding the bag, right? So it would have made it harder for me. But luckily, I had an excellent BA who sat me down and said, Karaleise, these are where we are. This is the projects. This is why we took these decisions. This is how it's working on the previous project. This is what we're going to inherit to this project. So the handoff was flawless. It was wonderful. It was detailed. And I really encourage us, if we're ever having to hand off, that we do that as well for the next BA. And if we have any documentation that we can share, set up a session with that person, walk them through it, help them, because we're all working for the good of the project and for the company. And I think it's very professional for us to really give the next person a helping hand to get started. So I had that. I had a very good handoff. But also, in the previous project, they told me about all the things that went wrong. So I already anticipated what I don't want to go wrong in my project, because I know that we only have 4 sprints and we don't have wiggle room. We don't have time to catch up. Everything has to happen exactly on the time. So one of the problems that they had in the prior project was everybody was writing user stories. So everybody was in the backlog adding a story here, and then somebody assigned it over there, and some developer pick it up and working on it. When demo time comes, like, where did that come from? Who approved that? Why is that in there? Oh, we got to take that out. So the amount of rework was a lot because nobody owned the backlog. The backlog was just for everybody. So in my project, I was like, nobody touched my backlog. My backlog is mine. But I can do that because I had a lot of dominion over the business requirements, and I really understood what we're building. If you're in a large project where there is just too much for one person to handle, then you probably can't be the only owner of the backlog, right? I mean, along with the product owners, of course. But it's important to have some kind of control of who is creating the user stories, because it can get wild. I mean, I'm not saying that you can't have other people create it, because sometimes there's a back-end story and the developer knows best what to put in the story anyway, so might as well he go ahead and create it. But I will really work with the team to help them to understand that I need to be aware of what it is that we're building, because at the end of the day, I would be the responsible person for the requirements. So I can't talk about stuff I don't know, and I don't want to look at my backlog and there's a bunch of stories in there that I don't know why they were created or who's doing it and why did this come about. So setting that ground rule was very helpful, and the team was very accommodating with that, and they always kind of check in to make sure, okay, do we need another story? Okay, let Karaleise create the story. Right? So we can, and the team was awesome too. I think having a good team goes a long way. Once I walked them through the business case and why we're building it, they kind of took it and ran with it. And when the developers fully understand why they're building what they're building, they make better decisions in the code as they're building out stuff, and we just have a easier sprint, and things get done better. So that was some of the good things that happened on the project. So So guys, if you liked what you saw in this video, you're going to love what we have for you on the Back Office Club. The Back Office Club is my membership program where we join together and we have networking activities for business analysts, but there's also online courses, there's also access to our Jira board, there's access to our DevOps board. You get to see how we work on real projects, examples of our project documentation, so you can really excel as a business analyst with the support that you will get when you become a member of the Back Office Club. So check it out right now at backofficeclub.org, and I look forward to seeing you over there. Take care.